Welcome back to the Mystical Positivist. This is your host, Stuart Goodnick. We now continue our conversation in the studio with Russell Delman. Russell studied Zen meditation, yoga, Gestalt psychology, and the Feldenkrais work, and became one of the first authorized to teach Feldenkrais professional trainings. He is the founder of the Embodied Life School and the mentorship program, trainings that he offers internationally. So before our break, we were starting to get into the good stuff here.
It was all good stuff. Come on.
Good stuff, yeah. But just a recollect there, we were talking a bit, and you were expressing about the physiological response to expectation, whether positive expectation or negative expectation. And this was all bracketed around the response to our digging in deeper about what it means to integrate the future into our embodied life in the present. And so I want to touch on that. There's a couple of angles I want to go. We can start with just picking up where we left off, with this sense that it is clear, and now medical research has caught up on this, that our expectations have a profound effect on our lived experience in the moment.
Right.
So our projections of the future, whether they're positive, whether they're negative, definitely create a response,
right,
both at the body level, at the feeling level, and at the cognitive level, that has profound effects on how our life unfolds.
Right.
So that's one piece.
Right. And let's just make a subtle differentiation in there that's important. So we can talk about the physiology in the present moment of our expectation. Right? Blood pressure, neurotransmitter, all like that. But then we can also talk another level. We can say that in addition to the kind of hormonal, physiological level, there's the neurological level in which patterns are forming. And those patterns are, we could say the physiology is happening right now. The patterns forming in the brain create attractor states that make those patterns easier to experience tomorrow.
Okay, and that can work both positively and negatively.
Exactly. And so we need to see that both physiologically and neurologically.
So is that a different way of expressing that the representational system used to express the direct referent can actually influence the unfolding of the direct referent?
I would say they're not synonymous. Okay. But that may be a little too much for this moment, because that's a real elaboration. I need to go back to the direct referent and the unfolding. But let's stay with this point about the unfolding, how the future is influenced, how the future can be invited into now, how that's already occurring. So a simple example that everyone would understand, I think, is if two people were 3 months from now or 1 month from now going on an arduous walk through the Himalayas, and one person was working out regularly, preparing for the walk, and one person was not, that there's a very great influence that the decision one person is making in their present moment is going to have an effect on the experience they have 3 months from now. We can understand that physically. One prepares for things.
Right.
I would suggest that we do the same thing with our mental patterns. That in the embodied life work, one of there are different processes that we do to encourage certain what I call life-giving states. So one of the life-giving states that we work with a lot is gratitude. And how, never through force or some sense of I should feel grateful, but how to connect the little experiences of everyday life of feeling touched by something with feeling grateful for that which touched us, and to take a few moments, a few seconds, to let that sunlight go a little deeper that flower, go a little deeper. That door being held open for you, go a little deeper. The little moments. I've discovered for myself and most of my students that a few seconds of attention allows it to go from being what I call a drive-by experience, where it stays just on the surface, to being able to drop deeper into one's brain and one's experience in that moment. As I said before, one can actually develop a practice of cultivating gratitude even for moments that have passed. That's a practice we do before bed. We go back through the day and get the physiological feeling of moments that have touched us. And so we get two things. We get to grow that state in our body at that time before we go to sleep, which is a nice, healthy thing to do. But we also grow the neural network for feeling touched and grateful. So that gets primed. And if you do it enough, what happens is something that's, I can say, is true in my experience, which is not because I'm a special person, but because I practice a lot, is one gets to have the experience of feeling blessed by life over and over, because when one practices gratitude, one feels blessed. Mm-hmm. And the experience of living in a shower of blessings becomes familiar, and our brains know it. So one actually cultivates life-giving states that then become spontaneously more present in the present that's happening in our future.
Would you even go further?
Nicely parsed.
Yeah. So would you go even further to say that that is more than just a psychological phenomenon?
Absolutely.
But that the nature of the world that we live in is so constructed that that cultivation attracts events in our lives.
Yes.
Actual events outside of ourselves that would seem to be things that we don't have any direct control over.
Yes.
We attract that to ourselves by virtue of this energetic field that we are broadcasting.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And you know, it's so interesting. For most people, when they are not moving in the direction of awakening, mm-hmm. What the bias of the human nervous system tends to be to repeat the unfulfilling events, to repeat the ways we felt dissed, or the ways we felt unfulfilled in moments, and to run those pictures and to run
right.
those stories and to repeat them. And those are cultivating neural networks that also radiate a certain field.
Right.
And, you know, my father, bless his heart, married the same woman 3 times. They were different women
right.
on the planet.
No, I understand.
He was cultivating a certain field.
Right, but this is actually an important point that we're talking about, because it goes straight back to the title of your seminar, which was the challenges and opportunities of
right.
awakening humanity.
Right.
Because to clearly understand the issues that people face, I mean, our brains are hardwired for this thing called confirmation bias, which is, in a way, can work for you or against you. It works for you if you're cultivating gratitude. Then the circuitry is pretty much hardwired that you will see, and things that one might, in other circumstances, not be grateful for, can actually be understood as something to be grateful for.
Right.
On the other hand, if one has created a story or a narrative about unfulfilled expectations and a relationship to the world where they're under attack,
right.
Similarly, their experience will prove that out.
Right.
But even beyond that, we're suggesting that the coincidences of their lives will align them to happenings that may, feed into the consistency of that narrative.
Yes.
And this is the problem that humanity faces when we start to look at the mass of people together. Like if you look at I'm thinking of the extreme polarization and discourse in the political realm of in the United States right now. We have different worldviews, really at odds with each other, and no real impasse. And when I look at that and think about what is the challenge and the opportunity for awakening humanity. The question is, well, what can we do?
Right.
What can we do? I mean, I understand that that we can certainly start by embodying this understanding in our lives, just as individuals, and that will touch other lives wherever we go.
Yes.
But on a macro level,
right,
it's a big challenge because there's a lot of inertia.
Yes, it's a huge challenge for. Historians say that every people likes to see the time that they're living as the most special time and but it really feels that way. What we're dealing with on the planet today, the forces of, we could say, enlightening and endarkening seem to be in some kind of I don't want to say balance or struggle or something. What you're pointing towards, Stuart, in terms of the massiveness of the narrative that is destroying the earth right now and is living where people are functioning from this picture of separation and domination of each other and the world, that picture we all see is no longer sustainable, and yet that lives in the world so strongly. So what can be done? Well, what I'm optimistic about is the potency of small groups of people all over. It doesn't have to be an equal number of people, in my opinion. I don't think it's like you have to get to a certain billions of people who are seeing the world differently. I believe consciousness unfolds differently than that. But for many of us, what I think is needed is, what Buddha called a sangha, or a group of people. This radio, your program collects in a certain way a group of people who are inclined toward what we're talking about. The Embodied Life School is a small group. Different Zen centers. There are different ways people are working with different language sometimes, but there's something that they're pointing to. It generally includes something about presence, that if we're not present, we're likely to be lost in old stories. That to create a new story begins in our capacity to be present and to sense what's the story we're in, what's the effect on our bodies, on our feelings, to be present to that and to take responsibility for growing a new narrative, a new direction. And I believe that happens in individuals and really potently in small groups of people working together. I think much more so than huge groups. I think our work now is much more in smaller groups.
Well, that's interesting because I want to return to something that you said in the first hour, which is where you were talking about that was the day, the 70s and 80s and 90s. Be here now, being present. And what occurred to me then, when you were saying that and describing that historical moment, was a kind of individual orientation of spiritual practice. And one of the things that I've come to appreciate myself in my own practice, and I would say I certainly participated in that individualistic approach in the times that you're talking about, and lately in recent years I've come to have a different view of things, in the sense that it seems to me that the work is not about, at least the work that I find interesting and relevant and nourishing to myself, but hopefully to others, is precisely in relationship. So this point that you're making about small groups makes sense to me. And then there's also maybe a slightly larger meta level of that, which is represented, it seems to me, by the coming together in conversation of these many small groups that you were talking about. That's certainly some of the work that we try to do in this radio show. Also through the bookstore, that we founded, and so it seems I completely agree with the point that sanghas, however that is, collectives of people who are practicing together in ways that are creative. To return to the discussion of creativity that we had in the first hour of this conversation, that's absolutely necessary. And now it seems to me that in addition to that, we also have this capacity for the creativity, for the creative impulses that have and are arising within these smaller groups to also begin to fertilize each other.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And this gets really interesting to me in terms of when I look at challenges and opportunities. So the first thing I want to just underline that you just said, Rob, is we're really I believe in a leap in terms of the centrality of relationship, that it was accurate for many of us to focus on individual development. That was, you can even say to go to a whole other level historically, the first teachings of Buddha were about individual enlightenment, and then 500 years later, with the creation of Mahayana Buddhism, was about the collective. And so there was something, begin here, grow to here, and I think we're really in a time. It's also, interestingly, archetypically a movement from masculine dominance to including the feminine, and the feminine is archetypically relational. And so to recognize that it's in our interconnecting within our groups and then between our groups. So then that brings a really fascinating, for me, challenge and opportunity, is the way technology relates to connecting or the illusion of connecting. And how conscious we need to be. Right now we're using technology, hopefully in skillful ways, to connect to people, and we're connecting with each other, and we're not just getting lost in the stories. We're really attempting to investigate something together, and we're hoping the listeners are with us in that. And when I see, my daughter attended the seminar in Boulder that I did last weekend. She's living in Colorado. And she just, on the way over, I was talking to her, and she said, I contacted the three people who are living in my town, Colorado Springs. I sent them, we had their email addresses, technology. I sent them these messages, and we're getting together to have a sitting group. And I thought, wow, great use of, her generation, it's all... But she was able to see, this is a great use of technology to bring us face to face. Right? And then she said, and I just downloaded this new app called Meetup, where you're in your area and you just put in what's your interest. And so if you say spirituality, or if it's young mothers, or if it's I like to go hiking, or I want to meet healthy people, that there are groups that get together, but they're using the technology, which can so often be separating, to generate connectivity, to generate relationship. And that's one of the edges that I'm really seeing. In the Embodied Life School, I'm an old-timer. I'm trying to connect to some of the younger people, and I've got to... Just this morning, I had a conference call, a webinar, where people could see me in Europe and in different places, and I'm starting to see that one can use technology as a connector, although I'm very conscious of these kids going around, these 10 and 12 and 14-year-olds, where their brains are not fully formed and they're getting lost in the virtual world, and how fundamentally, scarily dangerous that is for the developing human being. So the challenge, the opportunity for our awakening is right there.
It's interesting that you use those examples, particularly the example that you described with your daughter. When people get together and then they have an embodied experience together, the technology is enabling.
Right.
And we've found, actually, when we have used Skype as a means for talking with people, across the planet,
usually, but not always, people we've met before in person, and sometimes we meet them later after having Skype.
But and the point I wanted to make is that the quality of the interaction is very different when there's a physical presence that existed at some point.
Yes.
That then the Skype or the email or something like that actually has a connection to a real, I guess it would be the direct referent.
Right.
That there's a locus in the body which is essential for this. And I think what I heard you say, and certainly what I observe about the challenges of technology, is that when it becomes just a way to be in your head,
right,
or to look away from the moment, so that you really aren't experiencing at a deep level those moments of gratitude or those moments of being touched at a body level, then we lose something.
Yes. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I'm thinking, actually, one of my students said recently, when I was saying, I don't know about doing classes in this form for people who are not part of the community that I've been working with. In this form, it feels right. And they said, well, we might want to limit it to people who've had at least some personal contact, even if it was one seminar, in Germany, then they can be invited to come onto a call, and that feels just right. That there's something happens in our. I'm so fascinated by this, Stuart, that the way our bodies communicate, and that on one level, I'm communicating through words and our seeing of each other and our looking, but also our cells are interacting. The rhythms of our hearts are interacting. Our, what we used to talk about in terms of our vibes and our energy is real. And when we have something like that, there's literally a sense of connection, and it's not fundamentally just a mental connection. The mental is also there, but there's a way in which the organisms are tuning to each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, if I grade different modes of connection, the physical presence offers that moving center, that embodied connection, which is essential.
Right.
What I find with Skype, when there's a video, you actually get more of the emotional in there.
And
then if you just go to email, then it's like strictly mental, or even to some extent, not entirely, but to some extent, just like phone or. But when you have all three, or you have the basis for all three, then a deeper connection is enabled.
Right.
I think that's right. And I mean, we've had a number of experiences with using the technology of Skype, and one of them was with someone in London who we didn't meet in person for quite a few years, like 5 years, something like that.
Yeah.
And it was it was very helpful for this person to be in contact with us for a variety of reasons, and when when he happened to finally come to our area and we could host him and meet him in person and blah blah blah, it added a dimension that I think that felt like a completion to me of something that needed completion.
Yeah.
And now our relationship can go on from this different place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The other point I wanted to make about the challenges and opportunities of things like social media is that one of my bête noirs has been the like button in Facebook. It's like I refuse to use it. I have refused to use it because it seems to me to be the absolute. And now I understand they're creating a dislike button, but
that's to show empathy.
Yeah, right. Whatever. I just find it to be if there's an epitome of our disconnection from each other, it's something that enables and celebrates that kind of impulse.
Right. And one of my big concerns is whole generation, or many in a generation of people who are not really deeply sensing the difference between the virtual connection and the embodied connection. And I see that amongst, not all, of course, but that challenge is really there if one hasn't had some guidance into presence, into feeling themselves, and it's so seductive. The safety of that distant oh, you're my friend.
Right. but I will say, I guess, in response to that every generation, has, the youth have ways of either utilizing new technology, and the invitation and the opportunity is always present, no matter what the technology, for choosing embodiment or choosing avoidance of embodiment. And I don't know that the problem changes with technology. There's opportunities with technology, certainly, but I don't know that the problem changes, that we still have the same problem that we've ever had.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm a little bit more maybe concerned, maybe worried also, especially when I see the kids, say 3 to 10, already getting, before the formation of certain neurological patterns, before that I don't really think we know what the effects are. And again, I have a great optimism about the hardiness of the human being, but I've worked some with kids. I have private practice, and I have many different types. Some people come for spiritual guidance, some for physical difficulties, and so there's been a radical change in kids that I see in the last 10 years over before that.
So do you see that change as being, you see, let me just ask you, how do you characterize that change?
Well, one thing that's really dramatic and really obvious is attention span. That kids used to be able to, I'd play with a tennis ball, or or give them something simple to be with, as to move with. So many of them get bored really quickly and don't know what to do when they get bored. And I would call it addiction, the neurological addiction to loud noises and to the reward centers in the brain getting stimulated by some bing, bing, bing. The same centers that get stimulated with chocolate, bing. The addiction to those really change the capacity to be in wonder with simple things. And I notice a big difference. And it's not, I I also appreciate that every generation, has a kind of similar challenge to previous, and they're working with it in new ways. But I'm really concerned about some of the differences I'm seeing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that I agree that the differences are unique and maybe even deeper in some senses. But I'm wondering, we've had now a generation that was raised on television.
Right. You're right.
Yeah.
That's true.
I'm old enough that, I can remember having a black and white television and not too many channels around.
Right.
And I can remember when we got our first color television.
Mm-hmm.
But the television was there, but it wasn't quite the central thing that it's become. And that creates its own set of issues and things like that. And I guess I don't know the answer. It's a short way of saying it. They seem like problems because they don't seem to. There are opportunities and ways that people get connected with media, and yet it takes you out of your body.
Right. And look, again, to extend that, so that because I think it's such a central issue that I'd like it to be alive for us and for our audience, is simultaneously we're seeing a devaluing of playtime, of stuff you do with your body.
Yeah.
It's become so cognitive so early. Computers in kindergarten, and let's not have recess be too long, and let's get rid of the arts, because what we need are people who are going to be dealing with the new world, and they have to be mechanical engineers.
The digital generation.
Right. And that's really a big part of the dominant paradigm of the people making decisions about how the kids are going to be educated.
Yeah.
And that's concerning, really concerning. It's one of the reasons I was very grateful that it's not right for everybody, but for my daughter, the Waldorf education was really right, and that we have many opportunities in this area for parents to choose alternative ways, and even charter schools for those who can't afford the private schools. So
that goes to the question then of are these trends we're seeing, is it sufficient response to working groups, at the Sangha level, to embody ourselves? Is that enough to impact the momentum of this, what seems to be I don't know if it's nature playing out, but it's like,
yeah.
And I partly ask this because some traditions, like our Gurdjieff tradition, you had a less of a I guess positive view of it tended to take the position that at any given time only a certain number of people are going to be awakened.
Right.
That there isn't, nature doesn't work by having a massive awakening, but you need a certain function. So I guess what I struggle against is there a need to change all of that, or will the people who are called upon to move towards being embodied, serve the functions of nature by doing that, and as long as we make that available, that's sufficient work, or is something more required?
Something more required, in my opinion.
Yeah, so that's...
Yeah, I think it begins there in, being able to stand up for presencing, that we're in touch with our bodies, in touch with our feelings, in touch with our representational systems, and in touch with the environment, that the living moment, that all that we have, that we're growing that capacity. It's not the old story that, well, I have to wait until I get complete, whatever people think of as enlightenment, before I can be helpful. No, it's a direction of awakening, and to get present enough that one's interacting, one's relating to the world has enough presence in it.
Yeah.
And then action in the political realm, action in taking care of this environment, recognizing the imperative of taking care of this world that we're living in, and taking actions that fit our circumstance and fit our life. I think these become very important.
Yeah, and just to tie it back to some of what we were talking about earlier about the ways in which we can create a future by the representation that we draw our attention to. The possibility is available to think positively or creatively, to imagine, as it were, imagine how the future could unfold in a positive way. And that's important work, as opposed to dwelling on the lack or the problem.
I think it's critical. I think it's critical that we cultivate a positive directionality, a positive possibility, as we are also taking seriously the challenges and not getting passive about them.
And holding that balance actually requires being embodied.
It does.
And
it really does.
And the changing nature of technology, to address this central concern that we were just discussing, that the changing nature of technology means that in a year, a new challenge or a new concern or a new opportunity arises, a new way to be present to these things. It's things. I guess it's also a truism that people think that things are going faster. People always say things are now going faster than ever before in human history, and however true or not that is, comparatively speaking, that's certainly the experience that people articulate now.
Right.
And it affects and bears upon, the things that you were saying, the concerns that you're bringing up. You're obviously not unique in raising these. A lot of the conversations that we've had, especially with people who work with kids on this show, have directly touched upon these same concerns, and it is part of the job. Part of our job, it seems to me, to have these conversations in order to put that seed into people's awareness.
Yeah, and I'm such a strong proponent of both and, which means it's not a kind of hold back on the technology, but to recognize how easy it is for the technology to be using us rather than we're using the technology. Or the way Zen masters used to talk about sake. Is sake drinking you, or are you drinking sake? You have to see what's happened to your freedom in this situation. What's happened to your living interaction in this situation. Great example. So they now have computers that doctors can use to be up on information that there's no way a doctor can be up on. There's so many studies that the computer can go through so many permutations of possibilities when you put in the data of a given patient and give you the 5 most likely diagnoses, and how in certain medical practices, this is being seen as the possibility of replacing the doctor, and in other medical practices seen as this is in the background of the human interaction between the doctor and the patient. And I, of course, fall on the side of saying that human interaction is not just a nice addition to the healing process.
Actually, some suggest that the one common factor that predicts outcome is the relationship of the patient and the doctor.
So let's have the patient first, and let's have the computer or the robot behind the doctor, so the doctor can have that cognitive information to be in support of the feeling, embodied, connecting with the patient.
Right.
Well, that's a great place to note that we have just a couple minutes left in these conversations, especially ones as fun as this, can go very quickly.
Time is moving much faster these days.
Yeah, exactly.
And here we are in the future.
That's right. So I just want to provide space here for you to talk about stuff that you're doing up to now, contact information for people who may want to get in touch.
And we'll post this on the website, of course.
Thank you. Well, first I want to thank you both. I've really enjoyed the vitality and depth of our conversation.
That was fun for us.
Yeah. So the best way to find out about what I'm doing is to go to my website, which is russelldelman.com. Russell has 2 L's, Delman has 1 L, russelldelman.com. And on that, there are a lot of writings, there are recordings that are free, there are different ways of accessing more about what I'm doing. I often will have meditations or different kinds of seminars in the area, and eventually, for people who really want to get into the work, I have what's called my mentorship program, which is a commitment of significant time, and you can see that on the website. Happens to be tonight. My wife and I have a small retreat center in Sebastopol called Sophia's Sanctuary. Sophia is wisdom. Sophia's Sanctuary, and there's a what's called a peace celebration with beautiful live piano of a woman playing Schubert, and different readings from many different spiritual traditions. And so it's not locked into one tradition. And let's see, that would be 2836 Bloomfield Road in Sebastopol.
And is there information on that on the website too?
You know, I don't think it's on my website.
That's at 7 p.m.
That's at 7 p.m. tonight. There's no charge, and it's about an hour and a half long. People sitting in a circle in a beautiful building and enjoying readings from different traditions, interspersed with beautiful piano music.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great way to end this this lovely conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Mystical Positivist.
Thank you. You are listening to The Mystical Positivist. This is your host, Stuart Goodnick. This week our guest in the studio has been Russell Delman. Russell studied Zen meditation, yoga, Gestalt psychology, and Feldenkrais work and became one of the first authorized to teach Feldenkrais professional trainings. He is the founder of the Embodied Life School and the Mentorship Program, trainings that he offers internationally. Next Saturday, The Mystical Positivist will air a conversation that we will pre-record this week with Jim Wilson, Quaker practitioner, poet, former Zen monk, abbot, and chaplain at an Institute for the Criminally Insane. Jim is a co-founder of Many Rivers Books and Tea. We will discuss with him the topic of becoming familiar with silence. Jim writes, "The practice of interior silence is a subtle spiritual path. Most of us have experience with exterior silence from hiking in nature or times of chosen solitude. How do we find the peace and serenity of exterior silence within, when our minds are so busy and raucous? The way of interior silence is simple and accessible to anyone, scholar and worker, monastic and layperson. It is a type of prayer that one can engage with at any time under any circumstances. Based on the Quaker tradition of silent prayer and integrating other traditions approaches to interior silence, Jim will discuss his own journey into that realm of true peace."